This is Galdino, aka Mr. 3, aka I'm going to keep calling him Galdino because that's his name, and he's someone who I like to refer to as a stealth antagonist, because he puts in all the work, so much work, but it goes largely unnoticed by fans. But not today, because we are on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the man with the suspiciously semen-looking wax manipulation abilities, Galdino. So let's start with the idea that Galdino is a major antagonist whose themes are a bit too subtle for his arc. Because during his tenure as a major antagonist, one of the primary themes that he's employed to explore is culture. Galdino is introduced on Kuka Island, a vacation island, and one of the first things he expresses is the appreciation that he gets to go on ever so many luxury vacations, thanks to his status as an officer agent of Baroque works. However, the very first thing he says is, you can't beat Earl Grey, which isn't a localization. In Japanese, Galdino also says Earl Grey, and it's meant to establish him as something of a snob. This might not come across in English because Earl Grey is your very standard tea brand. In fact, I was going to say I'm drinking it right now, but no, I'm drinking Twinings or Twinings. I don't know. This might not come across in English because Earl Grey is your very basic tea brand, but in Japanese, it conveys a very different idea. It gives the sense that Galdino goes out of his way to source only the finest of English teas from abroad, especially since Japan already has its own incredibly prolific tea culture. So from the very get-go, we are painting Galdino as a man of rather refined tastes, or at the very least a man who would strongly argue in favor that his tastes are the best tastes. And we go on to establish that he is very quick to look down on others. After hearing the report of Mr. Five's death, Galdino performs an impromptu eulogy. He was an overambitious fool who didn't realize his own limitations. It takes hard work to possess the powers of evil. An overachiever who misuses them is pathetic. In the end, the superior criminal's greatest weapon is his brain. So Galdino sees himself as something of a high-class intellectual, a man whose sheer mental acuity has earned him the right to the finest of teas and the most luxurious of vacations between jobs. And he's also an example of a character where the Viz translation of the manga really enhances and suits him. The Viz translation often gets criticized for using overly florid language, but that actually works quite well in this case, because Galdino would always opt to speak the word less spoken. Galdino also gets easily frustrated by others who don't have an appreciation for the same things that he deems worthy, such as when his partner Miss Goldenweek says that she's bored on vacation. Galdino dismisses her as not having the finely tuned sense to identify and appreciate the luxury that they're meant to be enjoying. And this dismissive nature is also what leads Galdino to targeting the giant story in Broggy. Despite being on a mission to capture the Straw Hats, Galdino comes across an opportunity to claim a sweet 200 million berry bounty, which he believes he can easily achieve thanks to the idea that with a little creativity, and even the biggest mountain can be made to crumble. He very clearly and ironically looks down on the giants, which is interesting because he goes on to explain their history as well as how notorious and legendary they were 100 years ago. But everything he knows, all of those facts do not bother him, because Galdino sees himself as so intellectually superior to the primitive culture of the giants that he cannot possibly lose. There is nothing these hulking savages could do to counter Galdino's superior of mind brains. Which again, this is one of the key themes of Little Garden being culture. We explore two completely opposing cultures through the neutral eyes of the Straw Hats. Vivi actually puts it very well when she explains the grand line. Some cultures are very advanced, others have stayed unchanged for thousands of years, with both Little Garden and Elbaf representing the latter, and it can be quite a shock, considering that our introduction to the giants is where we see Broggy brutally decapitate a dinosaur and raise its severed head in glorious victory. Of course, Little Garden as an island also plays into this, because it's untamed, raw, and natural, an area of the world completely free of the influence of mankind, and that's why Oda chose Galdino to be its enemy. Oda doesn't choose arc antagonists on a whim, and I think Galdino often seems a bit mismatched at first, because on paper it's like, okay, let's send the Candleman to the dinosaur island. Lol, random. It's not an immediately obvious contrast. And I think that does very much work against Galdino's appreciation in the fanbase, but he is the perfect antagonist for an arc like this. The ultimate antagonist to a proud race of ancient warriors is, of course, the modern elitist wanker, a man who will always claim to be cultured, but that culture is hollow and superficial. One side lives to embody the well-established beliefs of their people, and the other side lives to arbitrarily arbitrarily construct tier list of which teas are the best and considered the most upper class. To be fair to Galdino, his tastes are quite good, because his tea even manages to seduce Sanji, and Sanji even compliments the decor of Galdino's wax house. So it's not like Galdino's completely out of his mind. He does understand and appreciate the finer things, he just places far too much value on them, and dismisses everything else too immediately. Between Galdino and the Giants, neither culture is capable of understanding the other, and something that I really like about Galdino is that he initially targets the Giants by planting a bomb in a barrel of ale, which could not be more the opposite of how an Elbathian giant would handle a conflict. They take pride in entering battle head-on, whereas Galdino is searching for victory without even fighting, because that would be the disgusting working class way of doing things. Oh my god. And our friend Galdino is a very white glove officer. Quite literally at one point, where he constructs white wax gloves for himself. And you'll notice that during Little Garden, Galdino goes out of his way not to touch anyone. Not out of respect for their personal space, but because he quite literally does not want to sully his hands with the oils of the poor lower class swine. He's very akin to a world noble in that regard, as well as several other regards. Going back on Galdino is a weird experience, because in the beginning he is a properly sadistic madman who desires to torture and kill people in the most unique and ornate ways possible to produce art, which I think is both a good and a bad thing for his character. The good thing is that artist villains are intrinsically interesting, or at least I think so. And it's because they often have unique motivations or uncommon desires of expression. They don't have your typical standard boring villain goals of wealth, fame, and power. Instead, artists are often striving to create something horrifying to evoke some sort of feeling that puts them on a whole different level of disturbing to most antagonists. Their goals aren't always fulfilled in logical steps. They're much more abstract and unpredictable, which is why I find them fascinating. And this does fit Galdino quite well, as he constructed this ornate wax candelabra designed to suffocate Vivi, Zoro, and Nami in the most complicated way possible. And Galdino's motivation as an artist is then stated: "Agony is the look I seek. Let your bodies become monuments to horror." And then he says a whole bunch of other bad words. He's striving to do bad things. And all in all, this is a pretty dark idea for One Piece. Earlier, Galdino also says that another reason why he's doing this is because his wax skills cannot create such perfect human figures. So he has to use real human bodies to properly capture the soul of the horror of humanity. And the idea reminds me a lot of Fourth Prince Cyrodiil from Hunter x Hunter. And because this is a One Piece video, I'm not going to go into the specifics of his art, but what he seeks is the moment where the potential of humanity is snuffed out and realizes that it's all over. Hunter x Hunter is also a much darker series than One Piece, and that's where I think Galdino's concept stumbles a bit. The psychotic artist is a really interesting idea for an antagonist, but only when you are willing to properly commit to it. And Galdino feels very shallow, as if the idea is introduced, and then he spends the rest of Little Garden becoming a very stereotypical over-the-top cartoon villain who doesn't at all capitalize on his established potential. And on some level, I can appreciate that, because it may even be intentional, to show how hollow and frankly what a basic bitch he is, after promising such intellectual prowess and creativity. So he's a character designed to be underwhelming, but the character designed to be underwhelming is still going to be underwhelming, especially compared to his partner Miss Goldenweek, and I think this is intentional as well, but she is, by every measurable metric, a far superior artist to Galdino. With her colors, traps, painting abilities, she actually has the power to influence people's emotions on an extreme level, which is what most modern art strives for, to create an emotional response within the viewer. So Galdino, he's over here creating all sorts of highly detailed sculptures with all sorts of well thought out processes, but it's not really accomplishing much. Then we look over here, there's Ms. Goldenweek, and what she does right is she paints a circle. And my god, the circle is brilliant. It is a stronger artistic expression. And the worst part is that she's not even trying. Miss Goldenweek is your classic carried by talent artist. She has a natural X factor that no amount of pursuit of his craft could ever allow Galdino to overcome. And Miss Goldenweek doesn't even realize her own talent. She just wants to eat crackers. And for one final insult, Miss Goldenweek isn't even a devil fruit user. Her power is produced through her painting skills alone. So it's completely natural talent. Unlike Galdino's devil fruit granted wax abilities that he's wasting, doing exactly what he accused Mr. Five of doing. He was an overambitious fool who didn't realize his own limitations. Honestly, I'd even make the argument that Dory and Broggy are better artists than he is. Because fighting for 100 years straight, mate, that is one hell of a durational performance piece. That is going down in history books. The wax candle crap, it's not going anywhere, except the bin. And of course, it gets even more insulting because cutting forward a bit, during Impel Down, Luffy mentions that he forgot Galdino could even use wax powers, which gives us an idea of just how impactful Galdino's art ultimately was, which was not. All of which I'm on board with. I don't mind exploring the concept of the failed artist, but something I'm really not a fan of with Galdino is how he concludes his time on Little Garden by constructing a wax mech because the design is really cool, wacky, and fun, but the conflict becomes very generic, and in fact, Galdino more or less ends up becoming Don Krieg with lines like, "In this form, I am already invincible. My special wax gently envelops me in a carapace that's harder than steel, and there's no weak point in this armor." So he definitely has the whole Krieg complex going on, putting on his indestructible armor and believing that, he's invincible because of it, which I just don't think works as well for this character. It worked really well for Don Krieg, not for Galdino. And then resorting to a fist fight with Luffy is very much at odds with Galdino's philosophy of intellectual superiority. And Oda knew that, which is why the true ending to the fight is Galdino trying to mentally outplay Luffy one last time with the Wax Mansion, which I think is a heavily underrated ending. A lot of people don't realize that this technique and its flaw are a callback to what Galdino said earlier. Not even my skill in the wax arts could create such perfect human figures. So he thinks he's outsmarting Luffy, this dumbass, by creating all of these wax decoys. Sure, his statues aren't perfect, but he's too stupid to notice. But Luffy's natural instinct is able to immediately tell who the real one is. And it's not just because Galdino's human sculptures are flawed, but just like Miss Golden Week, it's because Luffy has that natural talent. And no matter how hard Galdino tries, he will not be able to overcome that because he just doesn't have that flair, the inner flame of an artist burning brightly. And Oda choosing to end Little Garden this way saves the character for me, because for a while there, this was looking like it was in danger of becoming a very standard shonen fistfight. However, not ending in that standard way is also what I think makes Galdino a bit less memorable when compared to other villains in the minds of general fans, because what it boils down to on paper is a kick in the face with very little resistance, and really the whole ordeal can barely be called a fight. And I also think it can be argued that Oda simply did not commit enough to the concept. Galdino's whole artist villain thing, it didn't really work, it kind of did, but that's why the ending to it didn't really land. And when going through Little Garden for the first time, I know that Galdino to me felt like a bit of a villain of the week. A pretty unique concept explored in a so-so way. It doesn't really matter. Next week, we'll hope for something better. And I guess the next week of One Piece would be Warpole, so I don't know if what we go is better. But luckily for Galdino, he is going to get some pretty major plus points, and it's all thanks to his post-antagonist arc. Firstly, he does briefly return during Alabasta to face his boss, Sir Crocodile, who gives Galdino some very harsh truths. Mr. 3, do you know why I gave you that position? Do you? You're not strong like Mr. 4, but I thought what you lacked in brawn you'd make up for with your ruthlessness. But you disappoint me. There's nothing more pathetic than someone who fails at the crucial moment, which is almost like a meta commentary on his role as a villain. He was genuinely disappointing. Like Crocodile, I had high expectations for this ruthlessness, but said ruthlessness just turned out to be uselessness. However, this is exactly where we need the character to be. This is Galdino hitting rock bottom, and the sad thing is that after Alabasta, he tried to go back to his vacation island during Miss Golden Week's cover story, but he was captured by the Marines and then sent to Impel Down. So he was now stripped of everything, including his clothes, because they took them off him and gave him the fancy striped prison outfit. And look, as cruel as it may be, I think that Galdino needed to experience the hell of Impel Down to be able to change. Remember that Galdino had these world noble tendencies. He really was not far away from a full-blown god complex. So being humbled by the earth was simply not enough. He needed to experience hell. And when we meet Galdino again, he has been literally starved of his arrogance. He no longer looks down on anyone because he is at the very bottom. And he becomes a much more likable, almost humble character who I genuinely started to root for. Despite the fact that he was still undermining us, however, the decision to pair him up with Buggy was masterful by Oda. Creating a duo out of these two flashy but substance-lacky figures had such a compound effect on comedy in this arc. And when everything is said and done, you can, and I will, make the argument that Galdino was the MVP of the entire Paramount War saga. During Impel Down, he was integral to the breakout by leading the prisoners alongside Buggy. He was also the one who saved everyone's lives by briefly countering Magellan's poison with his wax. And then during the Paramount War, Galdino was the one who made the key to free Ace. He's absolutely one of the most underappreciated characters in One Piece, because if you take him out of the series, then everything falls apart during the Paramount War saga. And the way I'd describe this era of Galdino is like a stagehand, someone who is integral to the smooth running of a show, but remains largely unnoticed in the wings of the theater. And this is the panel that I think sums up Galdino best. You might not even see him at first, but this is from chapter 216, where Galdino has a painfully small cameo listening to Vivi's speech at Rainbase, which is an appearance that I didn't even notice until about a decade after originally reading it. He's there, but he blends in so perfectly that he doesn't stand out. There's lots of subtleties. Like when he made Luffy wax gear to fight Magellan. This is a callback to when Galdino made his own armor on Little Garden, and Luffy reacted with his classic starry cool eyes. And I love Luffy's dialogue here. I don't know why, but this brings a tear to my eye. Thank you. Thanks for making me look so cool. I just love that little moment because it is a proper full circle on the Luffy-Galdino relationship. From enemies to allies, and the stuff that he thought was cool on Galdino, he now gets to wear. But I do think the best way to show Galdino's growth as a character is also during Impel Down when he stops Magellan with a wax ball, and then we cut to a panel of Crocodile smiling and saying, you never know how one power will work against another, which is kind of like Galdino's version of finally having his father's approval. The last time they met, Crocodile ran out of words in the dictionary to describe just how much of a failure Galdino was. But now things have changed. And that smile on Crocodile, that one right there, that is one proud wax daddy. And then cut to the modern day. Against all odds, Galdino has become a character who will be present as an officer of an Emperor of the Sea in the final saga of One Piece. He is such an underdog. Most fans probably forget that he even exists, but he's busy making his mark on this world whether you notice it or not. And that is exactly what a true artist would do. True artists are not concerned with fame, fortune, and luxury holidays. And after being stripped of all of that, Galdino became free to pursue his work in its purest form. He ignited that artistic flame that he was missing on Little Garden. And I don't know if this is going to be controversial, but I think that considering all of that makes him a B-tier One Piece villain. He started out with a great contrasting idea to fit the themes of Little Garden. Yes, there was a bit of a fumble executing the idea, but then we were right back on that wax horse afterwards to give Galdino a full character arc, which not all One Piece villains get. In fact, most of them do not. And you let me know in the comments which of those villains you'd like to see ranked next.